Fondation Jean-Jaurès.
Penser pour agir.
The wars in Ukraine and now in the Middle East have put the international system and the European Union to the tests. They had a layer of geopolitical complexity to worlds already facing a range of major challenges, from health to migration, climate change to social justice, for instance. To navigate these turbulent times, the EU has committed itself to strengthen its capacity to act, to deepen also its sovereignty, and to prepare itself for enlargement. Now the Commission has just issued its enlargement package, and we will see by the end of the year how things go. But the whole question remains, how should the EU get ready to pursue this agenda, and how can it help or guide the countries in the Western Balkans to progress towards accession? Among all the proposals put on the table, one has stood out. This is this Franco-German report on institutional reforms, trying to bridge the debates about enlargement and deepening of the EU. Today, I am glad to discuss some of the results with Frauke Seebass. She's project manager for the Western Balkans in the German Council on Foreign Relations, and to address some kind of the first or second of the series, second video of the series, trying to address this question of the report from the capital's views and researchers' views. Hi, Frauke.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes, so you have seen these reports, but beyond the reports, of course, the topics which the report puts on the table are extremely relevant. So they open a little bit the box outside of just the debates on EU enlargement. Can you tell us how the reports or how these items have been received in Germany and how they are discussed?
Yes, gladly. So generally, I would say the report was very present, obviously more in expert circles in the political scene, but it was also very present in the media. It was also quite well explained. So you can see that the debate is really reaching also outside the expert circles. And then when it comes to German reactions, I will look at different levels, obviously starting with the German Federal Foreign Office, where it was commissioned. I mean, Anna Lührmann, State Minister for Europe and Climate, was one of the two commissioners of the report together with her French counterpart. And she was very active also in presenting the report together with representatives of the group of 12 in different fora, be it on the expert level. So you had like closed doors discussion with experts, also with parliamentarians, but also a lot of public discussions, including with citizens. And she was very positive about the report, of course, with caveats, let's say. And there was something, and I would like to clarify this at this point. There was the criticism that both she and also her French colleague distanced themselves and distanced the national position from the report right from the start. And there was a bit of a mockery saying like, okay, so they commissioned the report, but they distanced themselves from it right away. But of course, there are two important reasons. One being that the report was never intended to show only the German and the French position. It was never supposed to be the lowest common denominator, but it was always going beyond that. So they knew that they were also proposing strategies that would not really fit into the image of the French and the Germans. And then on the second hand, I think this is really, really important also to understand about the report. Many of the points that were raised, the German and I guess also the French government don't have a position on yet. So we are still debating. So obviously we still need parliamentary debates. We still need a lot of exchanges before we can actually come to implementing anything. So this is the conversation starter. And I think this was also where kind of the reactions were divided between those who saw it as a conversation starter, as an impulse, and those who saw it as a blueprint. And those who saw it as a blueprint were often very critical, including in parliamentary discussions, and were rather against it. But obviously, this is also not what the report is. So we had a parliamentary debate about it in the European Affairs Council in the German Parliament, where the different parties voiced their concerns and support. Generally, you would say that the Social Democrats and the Green Party, obviously also the state minister as part of the Green Party, were rather positive about it, whereas the Conservative and the Liberal parties were a bit skeptical about the German government giving up more competencies, for example, through maybe potentially losing representation in the parliament if the parliament is not growing, as the report suggests, or by not having a commissioner per country anymore. So like the sovereignty was what was a central point. And then obviously the Eurosceptic far-right party was very much against it. And this is obviously not a surprise, but I think one concern that was raised, and that is a concern that actually emanates across Europe, is that how do you bring this into the European sphere from like a national public sphere to a European public sphere? Because of course the decisions and the discourses are still on the national level.
Yeah, so thank you for opening this box. This of Germany, how it is received, and we see that even the differences are within the countries among the so-called parties. If we go now a little bit more in the contents of the proposals in the report, the enlargement to potentially 35 plus member states naturally exacerbates existing challenges. So on the institutional level, on financial level, on the political level, on all levels. From a researcher point of view, so German one, what are the vulnerabilities that the Union needs to address in its functioning, according to you, if it wants to pave the way for a progressive enlargement? What does the EU need to do, which is in the report and which you would take as a valid point?
Thank you. So maybe just to give one kind of starting point is what the report was aiming to do. So what was the goal of any measure that was what was proposed in the report was to strengthen the capacity to act, getting ready for enlargement, and also strengthening the rule of law and democratic legitimacy of the European Union. And I'm very much agreeing with this as kind of the baseline. And I want to pick out three points, three content-wise points. The first one, and I think the one that is most discussed right now, is the extension of qualified majority voting, or QMV, as we call it, because this is, I think, very controversial generally. And we also had at DGAP, we had a panel where we included especially also voices from Eastern, Northeastern, and Southeastern Europe, like from the European Union. And you could see that there's a lot of skepticism of extending qualified majority voting. And also, even within the German public, but also within the German government, we see that there is a reluctance to extend it to all the policy fields. And of course, this is understandable because we always strive for an agreement between all member states, and there's a fear that the dynamics might change in a negative direction. So we will have more hardliners, for example. But what the report envisages is that the dynamics change more towards incentives for compromise. And I think especially when we look at the enlargement process right now, the unanimity principle that extends to all of the foreign policy decisions also extends to every single step of the way when it comes to the enlargement process. And of course, we've been discussing this when it comes to enlargement a lot, that there is a blockage by individual member states for reasons that are not even of national interest, I would say, but that are used by populists in governments, for example, in the case of North Macedonia, which first had to change its name, now has to change its constitution. We see an emergent conflict between Albania and Greece, where Greece explicitly said, or where the Greek government explicitly said that they will block Albania's progress every step of the way if they do not install the Greek mayor in the south of Albania. I don't want to get into that, but it was direct blackmail and not even in a shameful way. And of course, then if we get to the issue of Kosovo, which is not recognized by 5 EU member states, we see that this idea of a merit-based approach and EU ready with the capacity to act, getting ready for enlargement, and increasing democratic legitimacy is blocked entirely in this process because of the unanimity, because there is no need to find compromise, but it is a very convenient way to get your own political gains on that stage. But of course, yeah.
Yes, so you have 3 points, you said.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, I'm going to be shorter on this, but I think QMB is really the most important, and the other two are also related. And what I really liked about the report is that it also looked at, what do we already have? Where can we already switch to these kinds of things? And so what they found, first of all, is, of course, the so-called passerelle clauses, most prominently in Article 48, but also in some others, where we already now have the possibility to switch certain fields or entire policy areas to qualified majority voting. And we've also seen, at least in the German discourse, that they will try, even in this legislative period, still to see if this can work, if we can, because it has never been used. So we have this possibility already in the Lisbon Treaty, but it's never been used. And they're seeing like, can we maybe do it so that we do not need a general treaty change, but we are already moving ahead with this. And at the same time, this is also something that the Lisbon Treaty already provides kind of a protective clause, especially for smaller states who see their interests in danger when it comes to an enhanced qualified majority voting. So this is, again, I think something that the report provides is like we have different options to reform, and some of them are already in the Lisbon Treaty, so we don't necessarily need a treaty change. And I think this is also still the largest controversy between the different member states, especially when we go more to Eastern Europe, to the newer member states who say we do not want a treaty change.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if you want me to go on with the other 2 points, but I can also do it later.
No, precisely. I mean, as you mentioned, so one of the difficulties of European integration, and it's relevant for potential treaty change, is of course in finding a formula that accommodates different national interests across the member states. And treaty changes may result into more community decision making, so like qualified majority voting, for instance, but it might also result in other areas into sovereignty, so being taken back, so as negotiation. So it is an open-ended process. One way to deal with these differences of in national interests has been differentiation, and it is also part of the reports. By allowing more differentiated integration, it allows the EU to move forwards, but at different pace somehow in different areas. But it comes with a caveat. If the differentiation is too unstructured, the risk is to lose sight a little bit of the EU's purpose and to turn it into an EU à la carte. How do you assess the proposal of the report regarding differentiation, which is framed in these regards in concentric circles?
Thank you. I think this is also something that has been mostly discussed. Like it was one of the biggest discussion points also in the public and also in the media, and also something that was mostly misunderstood, let's say. I think what this graph that they are using, and I think this was republished a lot also because there were not a lot of graphs in the publication, what it shows is more or less status quo, you could say, but what they added is so that you have like a very integrated, for example, the Eurozone, Schengen zone in the middle, right? And then you have the EU, and then like the possibility of associated membership, and then you have the European political community. And then what was really the point was this red circle that is the rule of law, saying that anything that happens within the union has to remain under the rule of law, because otherwise the EU doesn't function, including the internal market and so on. So I think what the report is saying that what did you call the differentiation or different integration? There are of course 2 parts. One, of course, the EU member states that already exist, and then the aspiring EU member states. And when it comes to the EU member states, of course there are chances, but there are also dangers. And I think if we talk about reforming the EU and maybe even treaty change, I think this should not be the first thing we tackle. So the European treaty that we have right now, the Lisbon Treaty, already allows for a lot of differentiation. We already have examples for differentiation where it works. But one very core principle should always be that it's open to everyone, so it doesn't leave anyone behind. And it should also not be kind of a way to blackmail. And I think this is also what the report is saying. So if we have changes that are not treaty changes, so it it's not adopted by everyone, but only some of the countries. If we have opt-outs, this can never mean leaving the rule of law behind. So it can only be kind of new incentives where, of course, some member states can move forward and should move forward if they want to. But what I think is also that, of course, we also have other fora that do not necessarily live, let's say, within the European Union. But it's also possible, obviously, to have this on a different level. Obviously, if this enhances the capacity to act of the European Union, and if it enhances also dynamics, I think it's great if this happens within the European Union, if it does not leave countries behind in a way. If we have ways to... Sorry.
Yes, and then maybe just a last question, so which relates a bit to this differentiation, because this is one of the dates, but it's not the dates in the reports for potential accession of the countries. It's more dates for the member states to get ready to have performed or achieved their own reforms, so that enlargement can then be pursued. How do you see this idea of putting these reform plans, these major reform plans, onto a temporal horizon? Is it risky, in your opinion, or is it necessary?
In my view, it's necessary, but of course you have to have clear communication. I've actually been yesterday in a discussion where this was mentioned again. I think the German political government position is that we do not want a date. And they've been mentioning it a lot because they think it sends the wrong signal. It sends the signal of, okay, you will be in 2030, so you don't have to work anymore. But I think what this is also what the report says, that it's for the EU to prepare and for us to set a roadmap and a timeline. And this is something that is also supported by the German government. So they are encouraging and they're hoping that the Belgian Council presidency in the next 6 months, so from January, that they will actually prepare a roadmap for the discussion on reform. And then hopefully the next legislative period of the European Union, so 2024 to 29, will be kind of dedicated to reform and to enlargement. So I think this is great, and I think this roadmap should also be accompanied by a timeline, because otherwise, I think I don't remember who said it in a discussion, but they were saying like we always need as much time as we have. So if there is a time pressure, we will also, I think there will be more incentives to move ahead. And I think we're also in a good position, especially now when we look at the Polish elections and when we look at the possibility of, having, for example, like a French, German, Polish leadership, which I think is something that is also very much supported on the Polish side, who were a little bit unhappy with not having been part of the report to a certain extent, but who are very, very actively also engaging in the debate right now.
Thank you, Frauke. Thank you for sharing these insights also from a German perspective and commenting on these reports. Thank you.
Can I make one more point? I'm not sure if you have to cut it out eventually, but I think this is really crucial as well. I was a bit too long in the beginning, so maybe. But I think what the report mentions and what is always kind of mentioned on the side, but what is never really put into very concrete plans because it's so difficult, is the increased citizen participation in every step of the way. And we already see that the report connects with a lot of recommendations from the Conference of the Future of Europe. I've also been part of a panel where this was discussed with representatives, and where we have to really enhance the transparency and the participation of citizens from the EU, but also from candidate countries. There are no concrete plans yet how to do that. There were some really interesting ideas in the report, for example, presenting the new the main topics, let's say, of the council presidency to a citizen panel beforehand and discussing with them the priorities, for example. So I think there are some ideas, but I think this is really something that we need to work on because, first of all, the citizens will make the decision. In many countries, for enlargement, you have to have a referendum, for example. The citizens and parliaments need to be at the hem of this discussion because they are the ones who will make the decision, and they are also the ones to give this transparency and democracy.
Although the report does place a big emphasis on rule of law, but it goes beyond that, indeed, by underlining the need to think on a wider picture of democracy and participative democracy, which is also a very key question for the reform of the EU itself, not only on enlargement. Thank you, Frauke, for sharing these slides. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for having me.